once the borders open up, we're going to see some summer loving. Migration hopefully will start to early simmerings, maybe next year. And if we start to see some tourism, we're going to see huge numbers come out of the property market. Hello everybody, it's Domenic Neshi and the crew, Sam Assad, Lewis Heaton. Thank you two fellas for jumping on the show today. Very exciting. We are going to be doing State of Origin this week. Not that I follow or watch too much football, and we thought it would be interesting to talk about the three main states, so Victoria, Queensland and New South Wales. And we want to chat about what we think is going to be the top performing market over the next 6 to 12 months. We've got a lot of good data analytics that we can reflect on, but then some real good quality personal experiences because we've done a lot of traveling recently. So, fellas, I'll put the question over to you. Jump in whenever you like. What state do you think is going to perform the best, or what do you think the biggest opportunity is over the next 6 to 12 months?
Sam, have the floor.
No, you first. You know where I'm going to head with it anyway, so...
Yeah. I think there's... where do I start? I think there's opportunity in Melbourne. I think Sydney's always... I think Sydney might reign supreme, but I think the opportunities in Melbourne, and which will go into further along for Queensland, I think there's a long-term opportunity. But over the next maybe year to 2 years, I think Victoria, in particular Melbourne outskirts, is probably the safest bet. And I wouldn't sleep on Canberra.
Okay.
So I've just said all the
Canberra
states,
into the mix.
Yeah, I think Canberra. I've had a bit of a U-turn of Canberra over the last 2 weeks, and looking at and why it's going to continue to grow, and politicians, government money, government jobs, hardworking individuals. I think it can't be slept on, but as probably what Sam's going to back into right now, I think Victoria, in particular Melbourne, is the opportunity for probably the potential to get into the cheapest and the most room to grow.
Well, mate, let me before Sam jumps in, but Melbourne. So let's just do some quick stats. This is CoreLogic data. Since the start of this year, Sydney has grown at 11%, Brisbane has grown at 10%, and Melbourne has grown at 5%. So, why do you think Melbourne over the other states? And by the way, just as a side note, Canberra performed at 15.6%. So, Louis onto it. Canberra has certainly performed the strongest next to Hobart. But yeah, why do you think that Melbourne is the opportunity? I mean, it keeps on going into bloody lockdowns. It's hard to do business over there. And also we've got the stamp duty rebates that are going to go away. So there's a few tailwinds in that market.
Reality is, I think that the pandemic has affected the market in some retrospect, because we had a lot of, I live in Sydney, but Melbourne had a lot of people actually leave Melbourne itself. There was actually an article that was recently published that's saying that there was a lot of people actually now resorting to reside, in either Sydney or the Gold Coast or down in the Sunshine Coast. And I feel like that big lockdown that happened late last year had affected, in some retrospect, emotionally, to the way the market was performing. And even though, and there was some confidence that was lost for Melbourne, but needless to say, even though they're only in another lockdown now, it's still yet to the population is on track to surpass the next 3 to 4 years. And I know I've mentioned this in my previous podcast, but markets, fluctuate, and they went through their big COVID depression last year, and there was a bit of a lull, and there's a peak happened at the start of the year, and I feel like there's still some decent modest growth, as opposed to you guys mentioning, Sydney 8% and Canberra 15%. I think there's spikes, and generally when I see a market that spikes, there's always a really sharp drop that follows. So yes, it didn't grow like the other cities, but I also feel that there's a bit of a modest growth. I feel like we'll hover around nicely and continue to increase, regardless of what goes on. In terms of the pandemic, it's still a big front runner in my opinion. Would you guys agree?
No, look, I think you're right. I don't. I'll reserve my judgment on which one I think is going to perform the most, but I think that you're right. So just some other statistics that we've got from census data. Victoria, interestingly, this is the first time it's happened, lost 6,500 people in net migration. So it was severely impacted by this whole COVID thing. Everybody fled the state, and the big state that got basically everybody was Queensland.
Yeah.
They had a net surplus of 9,700 people.
I know people, Dom, that have left to Queensland personally and have said the words like, don't want to live there anymore. And I feel like, for what they went through and the way they got locked up, they're calling it the prison state now. I feel like it's really hindered, I think people's confidence in the property market, and I feel like those figures really reflect of what they went through. I've got my younger brother that's currently locked down saying he's over this city. So it's mentalities like that I feel as though that businesses, properties are going to take the hit. But I also believe that the silver lining in all of this, if there's any, I know I say that comfortably in a city that we're not in lockdown, but the silver lining is that I feel like that could possibly mean bigger and better things for Melbourne in terms of maybe more incentives from the government, maybe more of a big campaign to get people back in. And I feel like when the borders do reopen, I know I keep mentioning that because it plays a big role to our economy, but when the borders do reopen, I feel like there's going to be some serious heat, and I feel Melbourne right now is being looked down upon, but I feel like it's going to get some kind of growth in the near future. Clearly, I've got Melbourne pom-poms on, but I'm a serious believer as opposed to Sydney.
For a market to grow still 5%, and they statistically took the hardest hit out of all the states. It's still a pretty confident run. Like I know we were talking about before. Yeah, Melbourne only grew 5%, but like 5% still pretty. It's still receiving some nice growth. Considering what happened to them what's going to happen to them. So I think the bounce back. You're right, Sam. I think the potential for the bounce back. If you look at the state who handled COVID the best, Canberra. We didn't even hear about an ACT Canberra lockdown at all. Obviously, there might be some hidden reasons behind why or what's going on there. But they outgrew everyone else. So now when a bounce back happens and, as Sam said, we reopen and whatnot, I think 5% shouldn't be frowned upon. I think it's got a lot more room to catch up, a lot of catching up to do.
Well,
so you think it's a sleeping giant? So you think it's a sleeping giant? Because and look, we all went there just the other day. Other day was months ago, whatever. But I think that you're right. This is a short-term thing, and people are very short-term creatures. Like
short-sighted for sure.
Short-sighted, but when you go there, it's still fucking Melbourne. It's still beautiful. It's still nice. It's still lively. It still has everything. It's such a great state. I think that you're right, and especially coming into the colder months, people go like, I don't want to be in Melbourne. This sucks because it's so cold. Sure. But I actually think that you're going to see those spring shoots. They say this when summer comes, spring shoots, summer season coming. I reckon we're going to see a huge Victoria revival, especially if they drop the borders. You're going to see a massive resurgence in Melbourne.
Yeah,
I really, really do believe that.
But let's just put it in like easy, simple figures to our listeners. If you own a property and in Melbourne that's 600 grand and you got 5% growth on that, how much is that in dollar value? It's 30K. I mean, it's still pretty good. So it's not like it fell into a negative.
That's what. Yeah, it's not going backwards.
So to me, it's still a really a great front runner. And honestly, who wants to live in Canberra anyway? So,
Well, interestingly, I think you're right. And in spite of all of the noise, and in spite of COVID, and in spite of taking all the hits, the most recent auction clearance numbers show that Victoria was the strongest performing state. So 94% of auctions that were held sold,
cool.
which is huge. New South Wales 89%, Queensland 70%, Tasmania had 100%, but there was only 2 auctions in the whole state, so whatever. Let me just ask you guys, what do you think? We just came back from Brisbane the other day. What do we think about Brisbane? I mean, it had some outstanding numbers. For many, many years, Brisbane's basically done nothing. It had 10% price growth. It's one of those states that has an extraordinary yield, so that the amount of rent that you receive is much better than Sydney or Melbourne. And it's easy for us to kind of poo-poo Brisbane and say we don't like it that much. But we went there, we had a great time. Some of us had a better time than others. But what do you reckon? What do you think about Brisbane?
Louis?
I'll be the positive light, I think. I honestly, wholeheartedly, I believe in it. I think that if you're looking to flip the coin and make money in the first 5 years, I don't think you should be buying there. I can see Brisbane as because what happened to Western Sydney maybe 10, 15 years ago. It's hard to picture and it's hard to imagine, as there's so much greenfield, that there's so much development space and potential, and there's not enough. Well, there's no migration at all internationally. There's no migration. It's interstate migration. People going to Brisbane. I get it, but property prices and you get pieces of land cheap, but it's buy it now, close your eyes, and wake up in 10 years time. For me personally, it's not. I think it's good to get a piece, but it's not something that's one. It's not bougie. It's not nice. It's not something that doesn't really tickle your fancy for me personally. But it's one of those things, if you put it in your portfolio, or like you buy a piece of it, or you buy 2 pieces of it, and you let it sit and you sort of set and forget about it. That's probably the strategy that I take. Mm. But you have to really close your eyes and imagine hard, because it's not easy to. Because you see fields and fields and fields and fields and cookie cutter stock, and it's hard to think that there's potential there. But I mean, no one thought there was potential in Sydney's northwest. So personal.
And what's happening? What was Northwest 10 years ago? What happened there? Everyone's like, "What the hell? Where are you going? What's Schofields? What's Kenshurst? What were the prices sort of 10 or 15 years ago, and what are they now?"
Yeah, people were considered farmers back then, but now there's apartment developments happening in Schofields and Sydney's far northwest, which was just which is actually still unbelievable. But
what is it, 60, 70 Ks out?
We are in, about probably, I think, between 40, 50. So Schofields will probably be about another probably 5, 10 past the hills area. But I think to my point, it's hard to fathom what's going to happen. But I think that it's a long-term play. And this will back into the Olympics as well with the inner city stuff and the infrastructure and investment by the government pumping money into the actual CBD. But I think that the back end and the land sites, it's buy it while it's cheap, because prices are rising. But at the same time, it's not a flip.
Sam, what do you reckon, mate? Like, I know that there were some areas you were and some areas that you weren't impressed with, and you're pretty vocal when we were on site. You basically didn't want to walk into one development. You're like, nah, not doing it.
Well, look, the thing is, I think I'm just going to agree with Louis saying that it is the long term. It comes down to your investment strategy. If your strategy is growth, I think that's not where you go. It's not the city to go to. If you want high yields, I have to admit it's pretty good. So if you want something that's going to give you a good return, maybe practically, maybe positively geared in your first couple of years, I think it's the investment to go to. But don't expect growth in the next 3 to 4 years. And I do see, I know government infrastructure is a big factor in capital growth, but and I do see that there's some numbers that's going to be pumped out. But I also have to admit that it's going to take a very long time for it to catch up to Melbourne and Sydney. So the way I see it is the investment opportunity is there, but if you're after a higher growth an opportunity, I think you need to head down south and find better dwellings that would work better there.
Look, I'm going to be contentious because we went there, we had an awesome night in town, then we drove down to Wynnum, which was, I thought, beautiful. We're on the water, really, really nice. You could see there's a lot of development from a brand new homes perspective. And when we went south, you're spending $450,000. You're buying a brand new 4-bedroom house, double car garage with a good specification in an area that's 30 Ks out of the CBD. And what Louis is saying is it's hard to predict sometimes. And what we just saw is over the last 6 months, it grew 10%. Then we also saw that we got migration. It's the highest net migration of all the other states. And based on the numbers that we're looking at, the areas that we're looking, there's a lot of infrastructure going in. You got that. Do you remember that Crestmead Logistics Centre we went to? It's completing in 2025. They're spending $1.5 billion to make a whole logistics centre. So that's a lot of extra jobs. It's a lot of infrastructure. There's a lot of people that are going to be paid good money to live near where they work. And back to Louis' point about Schofields and that whole area that what was it, the Northern Industrial Park, Northern Commercial Park, Louis, in your area?
Whereabouts?
What's it called? Basically, the whole heap of IT workers and the Norwest
Business Park.
So have a look what happened after that. Norwest Business Park came in and that whole area just exploded. Homes now, as you're saying, it's 40, 50 kilometres out of the CBD for Sydney, and the houses are selling for $1.1, $1.2, $1.5 million upward. So I hate to be that person that says, no, don't do Brisbane. I've done that for many years, and I just think for $450,000, 4.5%, 5% yield is pretty good, plus depreciation. I'm not going to say it's my top market, but I will say that it is a market. It's something you should keep an eye on, and it's something, if you've got some spare cash, it's a good, easy bet for the 5-10 years. Not to mention Olympics.
Yeah. I think
what if we get the Olympics?
Yeah. Oh my God, the whole city's banking on the Olympics. And what happens after that?
I know.
Look, but honestly, from an investor's standpoint, there's probably perks from your property today, as opposed to, the general rule of thumb is to hold it at a certain time and see some growth, et cetera, et cetera. And I think if you want that short-term gain, I think it's definitely the way to go. But if you are after a competitive markets, that that the growth is there, I think there are other opportunities. Dom, I used to sell, Queensland 5 years ago, so I was actually pleasantly surprised when when we got to Brisbane 2 weeks ago, and I was just like, whoa, this is actually a really it's been revived. There's more building, so I could see the growth that's happened there. I just think from a state's point of view, it's going to take a lot longer for it to be livable in all regions, as opposed to dense Sydney or metropolitan Melbourne.
And what do we think about Sydney? We haven't really spoken about Sydney. We all live in Sydney. You're in a brand new apartment. Sam's in the people listening. Sam's in a brand new apartment. His views are absolutely stunning. He's got the whole city in as a vista. Can you share it actually, Sam? Show us.
I have to say that I'm a rent investor, so I invest elsewhere, but I pay top rent for where I want to live. So I think there's actually nothing wrong with that. But really, from a Sydney point of view, to me, I find it a very inflated, expensive market, and you need millions for you to buy in, and the value, the dollar to value ratio is completely imbalanced. So I would rather get in early to other states like Melbourne or Brisbane, and see growth elsewhere. But needless to say, Sydney is still, what did you call it before, Louis? Superior what?
Premier market.
Premier market.
Called it like the superior something, superior queen or something. I don't know. And
State.
And it is though. I think,
but it is, and people still want to live here. People still, idiots, want to pay $800 a week for rent like me, because it's still a beautiful city. So it holds its value there, admittedly. But I think also if you're a first-time investor or third, fourth, there's opportunities to still pay $600 to $700,000. You can't in Sydney pay $600-700,000, good value for dollar, and lower your risk profile, I guess. Less debt and make money elsewhere.
Mm.
So yeah, I think Melbourne.
I think Sydney is a good state. You're right. It just costs. I mean, Sydney's a good city, but it's expensive, and you got to be prepared to buy something in areas that you don't like, or you're probably not that comfortable living in.
It's true. If someone told me Kellyville is $1.5 million 4 years ago, I would have laughed at them. But I cannot believe that this area, 60, 70 kilometers out, whatever it is $1.5 million. And I'm like, 60, 70 kilometers is classified as regional Victoria in Melbourne.
Yeah.
I'm being facetious, but it's true though. It's so true. 60, 70 kilometers is like, whoa, man, you're in regional, you're in new estates, but it's not like that.
Just so we can close this thing. So Kellyville is 36 kilometers out of Sydney. That's okay,
it's still a 45 hour drive from the CBD.
But it's not affordable, is it? And if you go where the more affordable areas are, so Marsden Park and stuff, now you're starting to move out to like Vineyard, Schofield. That's 45, 50 kilometers out. And
sorry, maybe I was thinking Austral Leppington, 60, 70 kilometers, Oran Parkway, I think. Yeah.
Miss Guza. But even Austral's not affordable anymore. You can't afford to go. We used to go pick up house and land packs for 700 or 680, 700, 730.
How long ago?
Last year.
No way.
Yeah, we had clients that spent $680,000 in a 4-bedroom house. Beautiful, being built by Metricon. You can't do that now. Clients there are people spending $1 million on land in Austral now. $1 million on land.
My God. That gets you something in a city in Melbourne.
Yeah.
And it's an income producing asset. Sorry, there's something that's going to give you something in return. Oh, okay. Well, I don't want to. I'm biased, clearly, but I've my point of views. So if you're listening and you want to buy Melbourne, contact me and we can have a good discussion. And if you want to argue with me, I'm more than happy to. So
if you want to be convinced,
yeah.
Okay, so let's put our bets in now, and we're gonna jump back into this. What state is going to perform the best, or what city is going to perform the best in the next 6 months? Put your bets in now. Whoever wins will buy you lunch or something.
What's it out of? Brisbane, Melbourne, all of them?
Whatever state you want.
Oh, okay.
Not that changes your bet.
I'm going to say...
What's going to have the most growth from now till then?
From now till the end of the year?
Yep.
All right.
Louis?
Total return.
Canberra or Brisbane. But I think the Melbourne story is going to be hindered, even though it's only been 2 weeks or 3 weeks. However long they go through this lockdown, even if it ends tomorrow, I think the confidence, this second jab of whatever's going on down there is probably is hinder them for the rest of the year, and not in a bad way for the property prices over the next 2-3 years. Over the next 6 months, it's going to take them that recovery period again. But again, if we see government stimulus come back in like they already have, like they've not into the property market, they put into the individuals' finances. If you lose a certain amount of hours, they're pumping, giving that JobKeeper, or they're supplying that again. So there's still stimulus coming. I don't think it's going to be the fastest over the next 6 months, or it's going to not grow the most over the next 6 months.
Tom?
I think Sydney's going to pump over the next.
I was going to say
6
Sydney.
months.
So it's going to pump, but if you got $1.5 million, that's the cost to get into a city that probably won't really let you down, to be honest.
Well, it's never. I don't think it's ever really, like, if you look at the cycle of the graph of 20 years, it's never really been a bad investment. Obviously, people have mistimed it, and it's gone stagnant, or it's dipped a little, but it's not a market that you've lost all your money. If you buy and hold in Sydney, it's going to go in one direction if you can afford it.
Sam, you're obviously Melbourne.
I know Melbourne, but really just because of current situation and the vibe that I'm getting as well, and the last, the slowest growth in the last 6 months, I really have to say that Sydney would surpass just this year, just with the realistic factors.
This time next year, then let's do that. So this time next year, which, if you're going to invest, say $750,000,
okay,
what investment will perform the best?
On $750K,
say 800 max.
I would say, Sydney or Melbourne. I have to say Sydney I have to say Sydney to be, Sydney.
So like a nice Sydney apartment, 800K roughly. Well, it's 800K. You got to spend 800K.
Right, okay.
Oh, maybe like a Sydney townhouse.
Yeah, Sydney townhouse. Yeah. I think
Jenny's cheering. She's happy about that.
She bought one. From a dwelling perspective, maybe Sydney.
Okay.
Louis?
I think I'm probably right. Over the next year, a Sydney dwelling that is 10 to 15Ks out of the CBD on a radius.
800K?
Even maybe
$800,000. What are you going to buy with 800K, 10 to 15Ks? A one better?
Well, Bexley's 15Ks out of the CBD.
Oh, that's true.
800K, you get a 2-bed, 2-bath if you wanted to. But
okay.
But I also think if you extend that period to 18 to 2 years, I think a Melbourne townhouse will reign supreme in the right area.
A Melbourne townie. I reckon 800K. I'd go buy like an inner city Melbourne townie, and that'll pump over the next 12 months. You watch. The state's going to reinvigorate, but it's going to be a renaissance around this country. And what I mean by that is that once the borders open up, we're going to see some summer loving. Migration hopefully will start to early simmerings, maybe next year. And if we start to see some tourism, we're going to see huge numbers come out of the property market.
All it takes is an update from the government that a few more bubbles are starting to open, and that will just hype up activity and drive up markets. And I feel like when we reintroduce all the people that left, coming back, finish off studies, back on visa works, all this is just going to really shoot, this golden country, a lot higher than it is. And we're going to see it.
Do you think there's a Perth story, Dom?
Where's Perth?
I do think there's a Perth story. Perth? Where's Perth? I think Perth's story is really interesting. Peter and I have been talking about it a lot because we're watching commodity prices. Iron ore is like its highest level, and it's going to keep on pumping because there's inflation. People are still needing to build stuff. We've got iron ore, we've got gold, we've got natural gas. There's some issues with natural gas or liquefied natural gas. Iron ore prices and the Perth market's really interesting. Even coal as well. So I think Newcastle, Perth are interesting markets for us to watch. And in Perth, you can go buy a house for like sub 500K. Not far out of the city, but I feel like it's a different country. So I do think it's going to pump. We're going to see some really big numbers. I don't know when that's going to kick off. It just comes down to the type of product. I probably wouldn't be buying an apartment. It'd be buying a house over there. We're going to have to go do a Wealthi trip soon. Whoever wants to jump on that flight, 6 or 8 hours on the other side of the country, but
bring our
Sam's
passports.
Basically, I've got to find mine. But yeah, I'm interested in Perth. I really, really am interested. Perth hasn't done too much. Perth, its growth was 8.5% this year, so it's been better than Melbourne. Migration in Perth was Western Australia. It received 1,200 people, which is better than Sydney, which basically lost 5,000. Fellas, I think that's it. So this is our State of Origin recap. Nice quick call. Any notes you want to finish this on?
Sam?
Not really, but I just think we to conclude, our discussions is that I think don't get emotional about lockdowns, et cetera, et cetera. I think it plays a minor factor in making an investment decision, but an investment is long-term and lockdowns aren't long-term. They aren't sustainable. So they might be a bit scary at the moment, but your property is not going to be locked down when it completes, say, in the middle of next year. Do you agree?
Yeah. Louis, any parting words? Any words of wisdom?
The footy heads out there, Tommy Turbo, anytime try scorer. Actually, I'll go the Travojevic brothers, paired to anytime try scorer, and New South Wales by 12. And that's some jam right there. If you do the Travojeviches pairing anytime try scorers, New South Wales 13 plus, that's your investment for Wednesday night.
Fucking hell. And look, on that note, the boys and I, or the fellas, we're talking about 6 months, 12 months. That doesn't matter. Okay, we're talking about this anecdotally. We're talking about this as what we think the market's going to do. If you're buying an investment, you should not care about 6 months, 12 months. We're buying a 10, 20-year, 30-year investment. It's the reason why we're buying something brand new. It's the reason why we're looking at the Olympics in 2032, why we're looking at migration and population data. Short-term thinking is not what we're telling you to do. This is just a chat. If you are making investment, it comes down to budget, it comes down to your comfort, it comes down to what you've got in your portfolio, but it's a long-term picture. So don't get caught up in what we have to say about Sydney market 12 months. It's about what you can afford and getting something for the next 10 years. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed listening, watching, and enjoying the format. Stay tuned for more podcasts. And if you like it, share it with your friends, all that fun stuff. We'll catch you all later.
Thanks for listening.